Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Burning the Boats. Today, I have Franciska Kosman, who I'm really excited to talk about, especially because she's the most famous person I know. So, no, really, Franciska, she has many recorded singles throughout her career, but now has a business where she helps podcasters, much like myself, grow their podcasting business and help deliver their messaging over this platform. So, Francisco, thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited, looking forward to the next hour or so, talking more about your story, your path, and how you can help others today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Oscar. It's such an honor.
Of course, of course. So, I think we're going to start right where, it all started. Take me back to your beginning, to your, through your whole, I guess you want to say, just life story, to give the listeners a recap.
Okay, so it's a really fun story. I grew up Jewish Orthodox. I am still an observant Jewish Orthodox woman. I grew up into a rabbi's family, a family that moved to Russia from the Western world to do outreach. Okay. And it was at a time post-communism where religion was suddenly not forbidden anymore, and lots of unaffiliated Jews from generations of just no affiliation, no information. So there was this desire to connect to some sort of religion because communism wasn't there for them anymore. So my parents move in '89, and I grow up into this family where we host these big Shabbat dinners, and I go to the school where most of the children didn't come from families like mine. Mm-hmm. And then in the summers, we'd go back to the States or to Israel, and I'd see my cousins, and they would sort of be that model of life we're supposed to be modeling back in Moscow throughout the year. So that's my upbringing. Russia's full of culture. So my mother took full advantage of the situation and sent us all for different lessons. My younger sister went to dance school classes. My older sister did art school. I did music school where I professionally studied classical guitar and piano, and we were all immersed in different parts of the arts. I danced as well. I painted, we acted, and I was part of the children's school choir, and we recorded albums there. So I like to joke that I didn't get enough solos after I graduated, so I went on and did my solo albums. I currently am sitting here today, and I'm so honored and just so blessed to say I've just released my 6th album. So even though that is not what I don't sell CDs to pay my bills, yeah, that it is a source that brings me a lot of joy and that has opened all the doors for me on a professional level.
Wow. So let's take a step back. Did you have any culture shock when you moved into Russia the first time you were there that you can recall? Were you like, whoa, what is going on here?
So great question. I was born into it. Okay. So my mother technically gave birth to me in the United States just for medical and legal purposes. So I would have an American passport. My grandmother used to joke, if you have to leave any child behind, if something happens in the country, which one would it be? I'm one of 7. Wow. So, there you go. So the second I got my American passport, my mother would get on a plane and come back and start working again.
Okay, perfect. All right. And so now, and by the way, congratulations on your 6th album. That's incredible. Do you find that there's any kind of principles or, essentially ways, I guess a better way to ask the question is any method to the madness in terms of how you produce, both your art, but then also handle the business side?
Method. It's a very funny question. Okay. So I am very entrepreneurial-like. Other artists tell me I'm very good at time management, and I respond to deadlines, and I work well in terms of, seeing my work as a business, because I've worked with many artists and they don't work that way. They'll be up through the night. I need my 10 hours of sleep a night. If I don't get that, I'm no good to anyone. So I am an artist, but I'm also very disciplined about it. And that's been very helpful for me. So any method to the madness, I would say the first 26, 7 years of my life, I've been in the mode of acquiring as many skills as I can.
Mm,
So I got a bachelor's in marketing and management.
mhm,
I taught myself music production. I learned, a little bit of graphic design and a little bit of web building, and
mhm,
everything I can get underneath my belt,
mhm.
I've done. Sales, you name it, I've
All right.
now
So
now I'm at a
hustle.
point though
Mhm,
where I can't do that anymore. I can't just keep
mhm,
acquiring new skills. I have to hire experts and work with them so I
mhm,
can scale, so I can get to the next level, so I can focus on my zone of genius and help
mhm.
people with the tasks I can't outsource,
Oh,
if
I
that
love it.
makes sense. Or
I love it because now
yeah.
we're getting into some really good stuff. Um, let's talk about your discipline though. Where do you feel like that comes from? Was it from your family upbringing? Was it just natural to you? How did you kind of acquire this discipline action? Because there's many people, many entrepreneurs that are listening right now that they have these dreams, they have these goals, they want to get these things done, but just showing up daily and not seeing the instant results can be a major setback for many. So how do you deal with discipline? What's your approach to that?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. One would be definitely the Russian culture and being immersed in music. I always tell, when I used to teach music to
Mhm.
children, I used to tell them, don't tell me if you practiced or not. I can tell the way you're playing right now if you're practiced or not.
Uh-huh.
So having that discipline of practice and getting that automatic feedback of, if you're
Mhm.
practicing, you're better. If you're not, you're worse.
Mhm.
Same with stretching. If you're trying to get into a split
Mhm.
and you don't do that constant stretching and it's not consistent, I still can't do a split, but that's okay.
You don't want to see me
The-
try it, trust me.
that's that's because I'm not focused on it, and I can't be focused on everything at the same time. However, so it's a combination of that. I would definitely add being a middle child and feeling like I'm responsible. And if I don't step up to if I'm not helping out with the little kids, and there's this and there's school and there's so much pressure. So I did take on that role of being very responsible and anxious with
Mhm.
that. I had to spend so many years learning how to de-anxious myself. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that stood out while you were speaking was the fact that you mentioned how when it's the practice, right? And it's kind of one example, because I mean I play guitar as well, and so for me it was one of those things where if you don't practice your scales over and over and over again, your arpeggios, things like that, ultimately, it's really hard to end up being creative, right? And so I think when we look at a business, it comes back to the fundamentals, right? We have to learn how to sell, how to market, finance, all those kind of things, and we're so kind of I just want to get to the finish line, but you can never play the concert if you don't practice the scales, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I guess you would know
Unfortunately,
more about that than me, though.
no, but I was listening to a podcast, No Stupid Questions, with Stephen Dubner and Angela Duckworth, and they were talking about, the muse. And the muse sometimes only comes out to the people who
Mhm.
are working enough for it to show up for.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't come and just get you to sit down. It's when you're practicing and you're showing up every day, then the creative spirits and
Yeah. Yeah.
excitement and inspiration will show up for you. But if you're not sitting at your computer
Mhm.
or at the piano or whatever else
Mhm. Well,
your
so
tool.
one thing that stood out as well was you mentioned that you like to have a lot of, at one point in your life, you were acquiring a lot of different skill sets, right? Now, at what point did you realize that, what, I no longer can continue to do that. I need to, like you said, focus so I can scale. What happened at that time for you to come to that realization?
I think the recognition of something I have is valuable enough,
Mm-hmm.
or like, oh, I hit that. This is enough.
Mm-hmm.
What I am, or what the combination of skills I have is enough. And that acceptance of yourself, because why do we keep acquiring new skills when we think, oh, if I just do this and I just learn that, then I'll start making more sales, then I'll be more visible, then I'll be more credible, then I'll be more believable, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So that moment in space. The other thing I would say, I totally flew out of my mind, so keep going.
All right. Well, to kind of bring it back, right? In terms of really focusing and kind of really honing down, there's an expression, um, you know, I'm afraid of being pigeonholed, meaning I'm only put into one little block and that's the only block that I can do, right? Do you ever you know, have fear in terms of being, I can only do ever podcasting, or I can only ever be a singer. And quite clearly, obviously, you're two different things. But, how can someone navigate that in their heads? Because many times, it causes a lot of anxiety. I only want to be, X, Y, and Z. But if I only do that, then what if, all of a sudden I can't do that anymore? What happens next?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I've learned this from my coach, Meryl Kriegsman, the best. I used to think like to put out a course or to say you're offering something, it has to be completely perfect and thought out and spelled out for it to start, for it to launch. And then I realized, you start something, it evolves.
Mhm.
And that's okay. And that's the process. And you get to learn and get better, and then maybe even charge more after. And the people learning from you, it's actually so comforting to know that you don't have to have it all figured out when you just start out, because only once you get feedback from your clients and from their work is when you could actually start making it better. Because if you sit down to write the perfect textbook without any hands-on experience, what kind of value are you bringing? I mean, it's great in theory, but is it working in context? Are you changing? You could have written the best course or recorded it, and then COVID hit, and then everything you're saying could potentially be totally unapplicable. You have to be able to change with times. For me, I'm always changing everything up.
Mm-hmm.
I am always relaunching or changing what I want to talk about on my podcast. I start new series, I end the series, I restart them again. If I get a little bored, I can't do it. I can't do it. If I need a break, I need to take that break. If I'm done with something, I'm done with something. If I want to start something. So it's that idea of I'm not married to anything. I don't owe anything to anyone. And the only way I can create that real success for myself is if I'm doing what feels aligned with me right now. And the fear that, oh, I'll seem inconsistent to other people, I let go of that, because to other people, I seem really consistent for some reason. I have been doing a podcast for the last 4 years. And if I took a break here and there, they didn't even notice, because that's how much content there is. And if I'm gone for a few weeks because I had a baby, they could catch up on the millions of posts and episodes and stories and IGTVs that I've created over the years. They don't even know I'm gone for a little bit.
I love it. Spoken like a true artist. Very, very, go with the flow, right? It kind of seems like you're kind of in tune with what you need, what your business needs. And rather than, just holding yourself to a really tight regimented schedule, which I feel oftentimes leads to a lot of burnout, you're kind of more on the approach where, I got to create something that works for me, so that way it fuels me and I can put better quality content out there.
Yeah, and let me add, it's so unnatural for me. I was the child who had to plan everything out. I still have probably somewhere in my diaries like designs of what I want my dream home to look like when I was 8 years old. Okay, I
Wow.
needed everything planned out. So for me to go a full 180 and say I'm going with the flow, because if I commit to anything and then I'm stuck doing something I hate, that's just not good for anyone. Definitely not for me or for my podcast or for my audience. So I had to embrace that kind of go with the flow, even though it's not my style. I'm much more commit, do it, even if it's going to kill you. Think of a Russian, piano teacher. That's the voice in my head I have to fight with.
So then was there a time in your life where it was very, disciplined? Obviously, you like the planning and the structure, but was there a time that you can recall where you just realized, I can't continue doing this anymore, being so planned, so regimented?
Probably the only few times I've been in a 9-to-5 job.
Really?
I did just a couple of months of that in a summer internship once between college semesters. And then at that moment, I decided 9-to-5 is not for me. I'm structured for no reason. Today, futuristic companies like Apple and Google understand that 9-to-5 is no way to go with the flow. You need to give people real autonomy over their schedules, and then they'll show up at the best time for them to work, assuming things get done and projects get completed and well done. But the understanding of that's how creative people work best is very liberating. And I learned that at a very young age. It's not to say it wasn't easy to figure out how to be productive, how to not work 24/7, but it's definitely how I work.
How would you handle accountability when it comes to the things that you want to create, the schedule that you want to, put together and follow, whether it's, I'm going to go ahead and grind out for the next 2 weeks, or I'm just going to take, 2 weeks off. How do you hold yourself accountable to your own standards?
Okay, so most people, if your issue is you can't stick with something for too long, get a coach. Get somebody you are paying money for to show up for and respond to. If your issue is you commit to things and then it's not working for you and you keep doing it because you committed to yourself,
Mm-hmm.
well, you can also get a coach,
Mm-hmm.
or you can, do some alignment and mindset questioning and trying to, maybe yoga can work, meditation and yoga, and really being mindful at the time. Is this something that's working for me? Is this serving me? Or am I doing this out of some obligation, out of some self-sabotaging technique? I told my parents I'm going to do this, so I got to do this. Or that teacher in third grade who told me I would never this, I'm still doing this.
Yeah.
Once you recognize those kinds of beliefs, it's sort of liberating. So it sounds cheesy, but having a coach is the most accountable way to just keep yourself in line, because whatever is true for you right now might not be true for you next week. And getting all your inspiration and motivation from social media is really horrible,
Mm-hmm.
because you could be feeling great one moment and then you scroll to the next thing and then you feel like absolute crap. So social media and following very inspirational people might not be the best accountability
Right.
tactics.
It also gives an inflated sense of optimism, and I'm not too sure if I want to say that. However, it's kind of like, and the reason why is just because, as you know, as a business owner, there's many times when things don't work out the way you intended to, and right, that's just part of the growth process. And I'm sure it happens with music too, right? You work so long trying to get a recital correct, and then you might miss a note here and there. You get that ingrained, and then you perform it better the next time. It's just part of the growth process. But if we're only getting, positive, but none of the real, it can kind of get you a false sense of optimism that unfortunately can end up, biting you in the butt, if you will. And so one thing that you
100%.
were talking about before were coaches. And do you feel like you were more open to having a coach because you came from, a musical background, an artistic background, where I'm sure you had mentors and people, you were learning from? Or was that something that was just naturally you gravitated to, or did you struggle with finding coaches?
So I come from a background in therapy. I had to deal with my anxiety and depression and childhood, traumas I had to deal with all the culture shock you asked me about earlier. There was culture shock when I was integrating back into regular Orthodox mainstream societies.
Yeah.
And figuring out where I fit in, coupled with some other life events. So therapy was something I was doing probably weekly for years. And then when I needed help in my career, and there are no universities that help musicians become entrepreneurs, and there are no universities that help anybody really become entrepreneurs, they'll maybe provide networks for you, and they'll maybe teach you a lot of skills. But the real entrepreneurship, the education around it, is around coaches and the people who make money. They're in the coaching space. And that's where I wanted to be.
Right. So you were like, who do I kind of want to model? Let's go over there and learn.
When it comes to money, I have great respect for people who go to universities and colleges. I just know that's not necessarily something they focus on. And as a woman, it's something so much harder to admit that that's what you want to learn, how to make money, unless you're in investment banking, obviously. Right. So yeah. When we're not talking about academia, coaches is where you learn how to make money.
Absolutely. And I feel the same way. I mean, going to college, how do you get a degree in business without creating a business? Who knows? So talk to me now about, I guess let's kind of connect the dots here, right? Did you start your music career when you were in Russia, or when you were integrating back? I guess, are you currently in Russia? Do you live in America now, or?
I live in Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, okay. So did you start your music career here in the States or back in Russia?
It's interesting how you ask my musical career. The whole musical career is very interesting because I don't perform much. I am a recording artist. And one small detail I did leave out is that Jewish Orthodox women have a very limited stage because female voices aren't allowed to men. So we don't have the stages of, the bar mitzvah, the wedding stages, because it's mixed audiences. So I had to have a little detour journey going on, and Instagram has definitely become a space, podcasting as well, and online music streaming as well, to create a space for female Jewish singers, Orthodox, to sing and directly target directly target women
Uh-huh.
for their music.
Wow.
So I've had to take a little activism side.
So you are the Pathfinder, I would say.
I wouldn't say I'm the only one, but
Yeah.
my podcast became a database. It became a research vehicle, a platform for these women to come on and share their stories. This is where I did a lot of learning, a lot of seeking, and I ended up bringing a lot of women together, and we are building a movement here.
Nice.
So I've personally, on a personal note, experienced the power that podcasts can bring to a movement and the online space in general.
Wow. And so did that need come from just, you wanting to be heard by more women? Or did you find out that maybe you and your friends at the time just didn't have the resources available and wanted to create something together? How did that come about?
So I would love to say I saw the need and I wanted to fill it, and it was so amazing. Honestly, I've invested so much money into my music production and my music videos. And then I was at a turning point where more conservative Jewish ultra-Orthodox publications didn't want to feature me because I was pushing the boundaries too much. And I wasn't kosher. I don't know if you're familiar with the word kosher, but I wasn't approved.
Got it. Yeah, no, my brother-in-law is actually Jewish, not Orthodox though. And so for me, growing up with mostly Hispanics, which are Catholic, some form of Christianity, the Jewish community is something that I'm still getting used to and learning more about. It's outside looking in, it's a fascinating world, and it's just I also don't want to overstep my bounds. I don't want to be disrespectful as well. But just hearing your story and kind of just again, you weren't kosher enough, right, for them and their publications. And so when you were denied, you didn't take that as, okay, I'm going to stop here. It seems like, right? You were kind of like, okay,
I wanted to,
right? You wanted
to, but the part of me that wanted to be heard, recognized, and be helpful was a louder cry, I guess. And I went on the podcasting journey out of a place of searching, out of a place of feeling very low and unsupported.
Did you consult with anyone before taking that action? Or were you?
It was more like my mentor, Rivka Harris, who was like, you should start a podcast. And I said, what's a podcast? Well, that's the next thing, that was 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago. It took me a few months to research it, figure it out. There was a lot less information out there when I was starting out, but I went with it. I persevered.
Yeah. No, I'm gonna do a little slow clap for you because now look at you here. And I'm really curious in understanding your growth process, right? Because here you are in this kind of subculture, if you will, where you can't, you didn't get the approval, but yet you went ahead, created your own podcast. So how do you attract your listeners? How do you go about that? And are you still currently getting any pushback at the moment, from the people that you were trying to serve?
Yeah. So when I started out, I thought I'd be educating the women of how they need to join together to create a market for women to sing, because if they're not interested, then who are we singing for? What I learned is that most people listening to the podcast are women who want to be singing and want to be dancing and creating art and writing books and speaking and all of that. We've also attracted people who are not interested in the arts at all, but they were very interested in the stories and the journey that women have been taking. I have specials, and I brought on people to talk about different topics that are not discussed, that are taboo. We had a series called No More Silence, where I interviewed survivors of abuse in the Jewish community. So I was like, you know what? We're going for the underdog. Let's just go and talk about it all. I don't have an issue talking about things. If they already called me not kosher, I have nothing to lose. Let me go at it. And I'm coming from a place, not a rebellious place, but of a place of wanting to bring awareness to the community, wanting to empower, wanting to bring the education that I feel I didn't have, or maybe the generations of my parents, the generation of my parents didn't have, and just using my platform, realizing the power it has and using it to its fullest potential.
When did you realize it had power and potential?
when people started coming to me and saying, let's do this and let's do that.
How fast did that happen? Was it after? I know you said it took you a couple months to research and put it all together, but how long after your first episode what did you realize, oh, you actually had something really good going on here?
So I like to debunk the myth of like overnight success. That's my favorite answer to what's your biggest myth that's debunked. The first episode I put out, I had 35 people listen to it. And then the next one, probably 35 too. And then it went, maybe to 40. It was a very slow growth. And same thing with where I'm now. And I have, a couple thousand people listening to me every month. It's not, and I would love to say it's a couple 100,000, but I'm not there. And it's not the point, because I'm not talking about very broad topics potentially. I'm talking about very specific topics that are relevant or interesting to a very specific group of people. I call myself triple niche. So yeah. I'm talking to a very, very small group. Now with business, with all the coaching and the coaches I've learned from, the more niche you are, maybe it's slower growth and less recognition, less love, less followers maybe, but very, very monetizable. When you have a product that's perfect for that need, you have very little competition because no one else understands that need. No one else has that combination of skills and expertise and experience to help with that specific need. And that's when things turn around. You don't need 1,000 people listening to your podcast to monetize it. You don't need 100,000 followers on Instagram to make money. Niche audiences is where it's at. And I was building one without even knowing that that's what I was doing.
I love it. And so you were talking about how you don't need 1,000 followers or likes or anything like that. And it's something that, in my circle of friends, we call Vanity Metrics, right? Likes, followers, shares, things like that. Essentially figures that you can't take to the bank, right? Now, when it comes to you and your podcast, because you are very niche down, and I'm sure my listeners are familiar with the expression that there's riches and niches. How do you define your richness in that niche?
So there is money, there's personal fulfillment, and then that being enough for you to continue going, like a mission or a bigger drive. So that's the third thing. If you don't have all three, it's very hard to keep going. If you're doing something just because it's a calling and a passion, you're going to get depressed, burned out. Somebody else is going to trample, step on you. It's not going to last. If you are monetizing, but you are bored as heck, podcasting is not for you, your business, you're going to want to sell it or hire someone else to run it for you because it takes so much energy to create content. And then the third thing is personal fulfillment. If it's not giving you that personal fulfillment, again, it's really annoying work to do.
Have you ever struggled with balancing those three?
All the time.
All the time.
But I go with the flow. When this is too much, I do something else. And the thing is, it's hard to sit down to do something. But once I'm sitting, if I just tell myself, I'll just sit down and, open up the app. I'll just open up my Logic Pro, the audio editor.
Yeah.
I could sit for 2 hours and get it all done, but I'm not committing to that. So it is that discipline that's saying, I'll just do a little bit right now, or I'll just take a day off or whatever else. You could switch your mind in the middle 10 times, but being very forgiving and because that's the balance. You go to one end, then you go to the other end, then you go, and then somehow it gets done.
Perfect. So, all right, you started off your podcast, right? Slow growth, but very, very successful. When did you pivot from, doing this podcast to share your message and connect with these women to now offering podcast services for entrepreneurs and other individuals that want to start their own podcast?
So it was very artificial because I naturally don't like to sell to people. I like to just give value and have fun and give other people a stage. That's, one of the reasons podcasting was so attractive to me was because for me to release content, I either had to write something or record something, and recording a song could cost thousands of dollars. It could take months. And then you have one song to release. Wow. that I don't like that, return on your investment thing.
Right.
But with podcasts, I sit down, all I have to do is schedule an interview, and then suddenly somebody else is producing this content for me. Oh, wow, that's nice. And I could do it every week. Well, I started off twice a month, but that was a way I could consistently show up online without having to do, the content creation. I ended up coming up with great questions, and people suggested amazing topics. So that made it even greater. But that's what I love about it. And what was your question?
No worries. It was kind of like what sparked your interest to then go ahead and start helping others with their podcasts?
Well, I had someone on my podcast who was a coach herself. She helps musicians become entrepreneurs. After our episode, I was like, help me. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. So I hired her. I went into one of her programs, and it was a very intentional transition. It was very hard, a lot of growing pains, a lot of stepping out of my comfort zone. What it ended up doing, besides for costing a lot of money, and I still invest a lot of money into my coaching, I have grown my show. I have built a business, and other people are doing crazy, amazing work because they're inspired by me, or because they're working with me, or because they just listen to my podcast. Like, I don't even know how many people are affected by what I'm doing, which is so incredible. That's fulfilling. And that's a mission, in itself. But if I didn't get paid from anywhere, I wouldn't be able to continue doing it, which is why I always tell people, figure out how to pay, fill your cup first, because you can put out all the albums you want and all the podcasts you want. But if you don't have a way to pay yourself, then it's not going to last. All the mission, all the beautiful things you're doing because you feel you owe it to the world, it can't go on unless you feed yourself and nourish yourself first.
Is that the advice that you give to, potential podcasters that you're helping that are afraid of selling? Maybe they don't like to sell because, selling has a stigma around it. Is that the advice that you give them? Do you provide any other pointers or any other recommendations on, hey, if you want to have a podcast, you need to figure out a way to monetize it, and it's okay?
Yeah. So 2 things. Number 1, the podcast is the best way to sell something without selling, because you really have an opportunity to educate. And once you educate people, you don't have to sell anything. It's just obvious. Number 2 is you're not selling. I'd like to reframe it as you're serving. You have something that's valuable. When a waiter or server at a restaurant asks you, would you like a drink with this? Or would you like the dessert menu or the wine menu? Are you selling to them? Yes, technically, yes. But what are you really doing? You are serving them. If somebody's in a desert and they're thirsty and you have the water, you are serving them. You are creating something valuable. Do they have to pay you? Yes. Number 1, you should get paid. But number 2, they will value that water if they pay for it. And that's half of the work. That's why the accountability hire a coach, because if you're paying for it, you are going to do the work. It's not about how much the coach is worth necessarily. It's how much money do you need to put down to actually make your dreams happen? How much do you really want to build a business or start a podcast? It's not about what other people, if they can make you gold toilets out of your money. This is, how lazy are you? And how much longer are you going to talk about your dreams without doing them?
Absolutely. It's one of those things where, you got to have some skin in the game. And I'm pretty sure, if you ever had free coaching, it was nowhere near as valuable as when you had to pay that expensive coach, if you will. But I bet you did much more work with the expensive coach than with any
unless and I'll add to it. If I know a coach charges a ton of money and I get a free 25-minute consultation with them, you know how much value you get out of that, because you're like, I'm not even paying for it, and it's worth like a couple $1,000s.
Absolutely.
So that's even so much more effective, and that's why I always offer a free consultation, because I also want to figure out if I want to work with them. It's not just if they want to hire me. There's certain energy that I can't work with, so it's it's a two-way street.
Right. So in terms of podcast, growth, or let's start with, starting off a podcast. What is step 1 for you? If someone's thinking about starting a podcast, where should they start?
So there are a few things. number one, so there are three things actually, right? There's the passion, the credibility, the consistency. Sorry, let me start again. There's the passion, the consistency, and the expertise. Now, with expertise, it doesn't have to be your expertise, but it's something you might want to be an expert in or on. So you just claim that expertise and say, I'm going to become an expert in X, Y, and Z and interview every person who's related to this. And then in a few years or in a few months, you do become an expert eventually. You don't have to actually. Well, that's what I sort of done with my podcast. I didn't know what other people were doing. There was no collective way to actually get that information except for to talk to 100 women and ask them, how are they doing? What are they doing? And then you have data and then you become an expert. And everyone listening to the show becomes an expert as well.
I highly recommend. So if you're listening, that's key right there. Go for it. It's
consistency.
It comes down to expertise, and I'll go ahead and let you continue in a second. But it's one of those things where it's not fake it till you make it. It's believe it until you become it, right? And so if you're saying that, hey, I want to become an expert in this, but you really have no expertise, like you mentioned, let's go ahead and interview all these people, and then at the end, you're gonna have all these data points where now you are essentially an expert in that field. So.
Yeah. And then you could relaunch and you could start doing a whole new series where you're sharing your expertise because of all the relationships you've built and everything you've learned. And maybe you created a new business along with that. So that's three. There's the expertise. Either you want to become something or you already are. If you're a doctor, you're probably already an expert in something. The consistency, creating a trailer, which some of my clients have done and no podcast since. That is not how you launch a podcast. Only some, not all. And then the third thing is the passion. If you are not passionate about, those wax candlesticks you want a podcast about, do not start a podcast about wax candlesticks.
I love it. Oh, wax candles. I wonder if there is a podcast on wax candles. Okay. So then, one of the biggest struggles that I hear many podcasters, well, just in general, business owners, is content, right? They're overwhelmed. They feel like they have to create this 200-day content calendar kind of thing. What's your approach to creating content, right? How do you coach someone who's maybe thinking about starting a podcast or has a podcast in terms of developing content that is relevant, that engages with their audience, but most importantly, doesn't overwhelm them?
Absolutely. So the way I'd work with a client is we'd create a 4-week plan or a 6-month plan, whatever their content is the most appropriate way to package a season or a topic. And then we try to divide and conquer. So how much of it do you actually come up with it on your own? How much can you outsource or delegate, by inviting a few panelists onto one episode? You delegate all the information. Sometimes my guests have to do more research than I have to do research because all I have to do is get them to say yes. And then that's all my work. And then obviously the back end of it. But creating the content is the podcasting space is a great way to create this content because you're able to batch it. It doesn't have to be perfectly produced like NPR radio. People are much more forgiving. And it's not like a book that you have to edit down into a couple of words and then you have to get published. This is easy access, what's the word when it's easy to enter?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
You get it's like there's a low barrier for
barrier to entry. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. So it's low barrier to entry, which is great. And the way I recommend my production clients to work with me is that we take over all the content. So instead of you having to come up with all your content all the time, create an episode or a series of episodes, a theme, a season, and then the podcast episode becomes the source, and then you repurpose it onto IGTV. You could put it onto YouTube and into your Facebook groups, and you create snippets and email newsletters and your short posts, long posts, quotes, images, audiograms, everything you need to just complement everything. And the great way to do it is when you don't have to do it yourself at all. And the only thing you do is hit record. So that's a sustainable way for existing entrepreneurs who have already created that business model and are profitable to add podcasting in a way that transforms their content creation and takes it off their hands completely. So call it a social media manager. And then podcast is your bonus because it goes into the podcast app as well.
So you mentioned in the beginning of the interview that, you realized that you had to kind of focus in order to scale and kind of hand things off to different people, right? And it sounds like that's kind of the same approach recommending podcasters to take, where it's like you're only responsible for, the content, but everything else after the fact, it's not necessarily your responsibility, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because if you keep on adding things on, it's impossible to continue, especially if you're actually running a business and working with clients. When are you supposed to, show up live and create your audiograms and write long posts and send email newsletters and all that fun stuff?
Should that start on day one, or is that something that should be taken into account maybe after a couple episodes, after they have a certain number of downloads, or have they monetized at some point? When does that outsourcing actually begin?
Yeah. So what I just explained is ideal for somebody who's already in a way either creating all that content on their own, or they have a few different people helping them with the different things. So this is an alternative that's all encompassing and takes it off their hands. For somebody who's just starting out, who does not have a business model yet to monetize, I would not recommend spending, a couple $100 per episode, because the pressure to get an ROI is very high, and the likeliness of them continuing for more than 2 seconds is really low. So what I would recommend doing, and I have a perfect package for that, is the DIY podcaster. They come to me and I set them up and I teach them how to do it themselves. I do not recommend doing 5 audiograms, email newsletters, lives, and all of that. That's something that we help already visible people sustainably continue. However, here's just put out 1 episode and create 1 post about it on every social media platform that you're using, maybe 2 or 3, and optimize it to each one. If that's too much, just do the podcast episode, talk about it wherever you go, tell your listeners to listen to it. Maybe get a great guest who will share it for you. And I have great tips for getting guests to share their content, because that's boring. Oh, hey, my audience, if you didn't know about me, because I talk to you about myself all the time, go listen to me again on this podcast and then on this one. I actually have a new thing where I get my guests, they have a choice. They could choose any of my other guests that they could share. So this way, my previous guests have a new audience, the newer guests share with them. Nice. So that's just a new way of keeping it interesting, because who wants to talk about themselves again?
Right. I sure don't. What I would say too is when it comes to, I guess, growing a podcast, right, there's really kind of 2 main schools of thought, whether it's or 3, organic, paid traffic, and kind of a hybrid model, right, where you do both. In your eyes and through your experience and expertise, is there one that's more preferred over the other, or should it be a hybrid model? And if that's the case, do you have any kind of tips and strategies that we can use for that?
Love that question, by the way. It already shows, knowledge and skill, and I hope your audience is holding by that as well. I always recommend that you start organic, because if you are paying Facebook, or maybe even worse, you are investing in somebody who's professional at Facebook ads, and their job is to tell you, by the way, not to start Facebook ads or Insta ads until you have proof of concept. If you haven't sold your offer organically, then definitely don't scale that. But once you have proven your offer to be at the right price level, or targeting an audience that actually wants this and it's a good match, then you can scale it by putting in an advertising budget. So the hybrid model, that is just the next step. Start organic. Always start organic. Start with 1-to-1 instead of group. Start small. Once that works, then keep growing, scaling, expanding. Yeah.
Now let's talk about monetizing strategies, right? So how do we actually monetize the podcast? Should we go after sponsorships? Should we go, should we create our own sales funnel behind the scenes? What do you recommend is the monetizing strategy for the podcast? How should we go about it?
Okay, so there are 4 monetizing strategies right now. One of them is the newest one. I used to say 3 all the time, but I have to add a fourth. So Apple Podcasts and Spotify and a bunch of others now have added paid podcasts. So if you are a coach and you want to offer a podcast to your paid clients for free, but then offer it as a paid separate thing to anyone, you can now offer that, and they could listen to it through Apple, through Spotify, and other apps probably as well. However, the traditional 3 ways before, last month, before 2 months ago, was number 1, sponsorships, where you go over and you say, hey, my audience is we talk about feet and this and that. You have a shoe brand. I think you'd be perfect because we talk about feet and health of your feet and whatnot, right? So that's a sponsorship. An affiliate would be someone who comes onto your podcast, potentially talks about their product, you get a commission, or they just advertise and you get paid by commission. So anything you sell, you get a commission on. The sponsorship works, they pay you flat rate. So whether you sell 1 million of something or 2 of something, you're paid that flat rate. The third thing is your personal offers. And I like to say high ticket offers. And that's my favorite way of monetizing, because you work so hard to build your audience and your brand and the trust factor with your audience. And then you want to go ahead and sell that, serve it on a silver platter to somebody else. What about using it to sell your own services? And you could sell low ticket services like a membership into a Facebook group or a virtual retreat. You can sell higher ticket offers like group programs and then or one-on-ones, depending what you charge more for. But the high ticket offers is a way to monetize an audience of potentially 50 people right away. Because all you need is 1% to convert or 2% to convert. And if you have the right strategies and mindset in place, it's really possible. I've seen it happen over and over.
So let's focus on the high ticket funnel, right? Are there some examples that you could share with us? I know you mentioned kind of the coaching, but would you mind going into specifics in terms of, the price point, in terms of what is considered the highest ticket? Does that depend on your market? Does that depend on your expertise? Can you just go ahead and do it right from the beginning? How do you handle, or how do you recommend we handle that?
So let's say you're a copywriter or a web developer, right? And your podcast is all about talking about different buttons and funnels and applications. And then at the end of your podcast, after you interview, or whether it's a solo episode, maybe you have a co-host, you say, by the way, do you have a business and you need a better way to, offer your products online, or an easier interface, or is Shopify or Wix too complicated for you? Hop on a call with me, we'll help you. So what the great thing about business is you could set your own prices. It's not what the market values. It's how valuable you position yourself to your customer. Are you solving a real problem? Are you able to help them with something very specific, something that they really need help with? And that's where the magic happens. It does not matter if someone else offers the same thing, but it doesn't really solve their problem, or they don't know about it. I'm sort of ruining what I'm just saying, but you get the idea.
Well, I think what you're trying to say is ultimately that it comes down to perceived value and how you present yourself as a podcaster in whatever market that you're in. Because, I'm for example, I'm in the, marketing and advertising space, where you have these, high ticket people who charge $25,000 a year or more for a mastermind, right? But then at the same time, I know someone who is in the crafts world, right? She helps artisans, create craft, things like that. But then she charges $50,000 a year for her mastermind, and there you go. So, and the reason why is just because her audience loves her. So, I think you hit the nail right on the head when it comes to, it doesn't matter what your competitors are charging. It's more about, what your perceived value is and how you position yourself.
That, as well as believing really that no one is like you. No one really has the combination of expertise that you bring to the table. And also brands, what's very important to understand, a brand is not a company. It's not a name. It literally means, or should mean, experience. What do you feel when you see that logo, or when you see that person's face, or when you see their podcast pop up? Does it make you feel anxious? Does it make you feel excited? Does it make you feel relaxed? So when people are investing $50,000 into a program, it's because they feel relentless. They feel powerful. They feel like they can step into the best selves and achieve any goal they set themselves, because that person is lighting up that fire within them and is creating that space for it to happen. And that experience, that's why people pay for experiences.
Mhm. Absolutely. I love it. I love it. You know, it's all about the owning your uniqueness, you know, and just, you know, putting that on blast, you know, literally saying, hey, listen, I'm a rock star. Let's do it.
Well,
'Cause I
that
think,
person makes me feel like I can be a rock star. How about
yeah, yeah, there you go. I love it. Okay, so now, and we've talked about monetizing the podcast, and I know one of the other big hurdles that many podcasters kind of go through is it always comes down with like the tech and the equipment, you know. So what are your recommendations? Should I look for something that's very high end, or should I work my way up to that? Does it really matter? Because I know you said, you know, audiences are more forgiving. But what is your take in terms of, you know, the tech and the stuff that is required to start podcasting?
Right. So the tech is forgiving. The podcasting space is forgiving. However, the only method of communication is audio. You're not sitting in front of them. They don't get to see your beautiful smile or, you know, whatever cute t-shirt you put on that day. Your audio experience is the only contact. So you want that to sound nice, even if you say, even if you stutter a little bit here and there. I definitely chew or slur my words sometimes, maybe with all the languages I speak and with the amount of things I want to say at once. So in that way, it's more forgiving. Plus, you can always sit and edit it out. But get a good mic. You could get something for $60. It's not. You don't have to sacrifice your life for a good audio. However, there are people who start a podcast on their phone and they use whatever built-in mic they have on their Android or Apple device, and that's fine too. Ask yourself, are you the type who needs this to really sound good, to believe in yourself that you can be a podcaster? Maybe you want to overcompensate for the voice you can't stand yet because it takes a little bit to get used to it. I know that from the singing end as well as the speaking end. So that can enhance the experience by using a microphone, a nicer microphone, but it's really low barrier to entry. And I have spent many hours on YouTube watching all these videos, which mic is the best and which one should you get. If you want to do that, go ahead, do that. If you just want to click on the first suggested thing to you on Amazon, do that. If you want to hire someone to just order it for you, basically, do that. Whatever works, whatever will make you feel like you can do this. If shopping on your own will take you 3 months, by the end of 3 months, you're like, I'm done. Maybe you need somebody to help you with that in one day, so you can get over the first hurdles a little faster, so you can actually get the experience of podcasting.
Yeah, I love it. Take action and learn through it. Perfect. Franciska, wow, this has been an amazing episode. I do have a question though. This is kind of really off topic, but since we're talking about podcasting and listening to ourselves and audio quality, as a singer, when you hear yourself back, does your voice also sound different than what you normally hear yourself as?
Different than what you expect after?
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's always the shock factor. Oh my gosh, that's what I sound like?
Yeah. Okay.
For sure. But I came to love it.
Mhm.
And my belief in general is practice makes perfect. You know, the more you listen to yourself, the more you can love yourself, the more you can forgive yourself, or create the opportunity to forgive yourself, because you can be really harsh on yourself as well. But it's a great opportunity to learn yourself on a deeper level.
Wow. So what is next for you? What's the next big goal that you want to tackle or that you want to achieve?
It's a great question. It always changes depending on the day for what you will ask me. Today, I feel like I'm doing so great. People are reaching out, suggesting ideas, or I'm helping them with their projects, whatever it is. Honestly, I was always focused on my goals and what I want to do. And now I'm helping others with their incredible projects and missions. And that's just, you know, I'm going to wait and sit tight, keep doing what I'm doing, and see where this takes me, because I get to work with the most incredible, creative, talented, influential, powerful people. And I'm going to keep my mind and life open to what opportunities come from that, because if I'm just set on my goals like I used to be, like a little 10-year-old with all my plans, then I'm limiting myself, I believe. So I'm going to sit here with an open mind today.
I love it. I love it. And I think it's amazing what you've done. And I already know that you're going to conquer a lot of more amazing things just because you're very in tune with the purpose. And I think that's the biggest takeaway that many of my listeners can take away today is that when you act on purpose, you can break down obstacles, break through barriers and have an amazing impact like you're having with all these women that you're helping out, right? And not only that, but also business owners who are starting with their podcast. So thank you again for being on this episode. Where can people find out more about you? Where can we hire you? Where can we get involved? Let us know.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It was so much fun. I really had fun. So if anyone wants to reach out to me, go to my website, franciskakosman.com. I have some information out there. You can also book a call through the site so I can get to meet you and talk to you about your projects and what you want to do. And that's where I'm at.
Awesome. Thank you again, Franciska. I really appreciate it. Thank you to all the listeners. And this has been another episode of Burning the Boats with Franciska Kosman. Thank you so much.